Hey all, today I want to talk to you about the heart and the blood flow that goes throughout the heart. But before we begin, I want to take a quick second and talk about the different vessels that carry the blood as well. And the first one I want to talk to you about is an artery. Well, by definition, arteries carry blood away from the heart. And that's easy to remember because there's an A in away and there's an A in artery. Veins, on the other hand, carry blood towards the heart. Well, the aorta is just the biggest artery, while arterioles are smaller arteries, and likewise, venules happen to be smaller veins, and the vena cava is the biggest vein. The reason that I drew the arteries in red is because usually they carry oxygenated blood, while veins generally carry deoxygenated blood. But that's not always the case, so it's important to remember that arteries carry blood away from the heart. Capillaries drawn in both colors because they're the smallest vessels and they're the areas of gas exchange. Alright? You'll notice that I wrote the letters B, S, and B because this is the order of blood flow. It goes from the biggest vessel, the aorta, down to smallest vessels, which is capillary, and then we grow back up to the biggest vessel again, the vena cavas. Now, let's just draw a heart. So we have an idea of what it looks like, and I always like to draw the hearts in an anatomically correct form so we know what it looks like inside of our own chest. I'm just kidding. It doesn't really look like this inside of your chest, but it does make it easier to break it up into four quadrants to know what the different chambers are. And so on the right side we have the right atrium and the right ventricle, while on the left side we have the exact same thing. We have the left atrium and the left ventricle. Alright, well, atriums accept blood into the heart, while ventricles expel blood out of the heart. The right side of the heart is drawn in blue because it accepts deoxygenated blood, and then the right ventricle will expel that to the pulmonary circulatory system, to the lungs, so we can exchange it for oxygenated blood, which is going to come back into the left atrium, and then it's going to go from the left ventricle and expel it out to the systemic system. So the left side of the heart is going to be oxygenated blood, and that's why it's drawn in red. So let's go into a little bit more detail. All right? Here we have a little bit more anatomically correct heart, and let's just label the chambers again so we know what we're looking at. So here we have the left atrium and the left ventricle, and over here we have the right atrium and the right ventricle. Well, let's get some blood in here so we can see how that blood flow moves. Remember, I said veins bring blood back towards the heart, and the vena cavas are the biggest ones, so we're going to just draw the vena cavas, and there's two of them. There is a superior vena cava, or SVC, and an inferior vena cava, or IVC. The superior vena cava brings blood back from the head and the arms, while the inferior vena cava brings blood back from the rest of the body. So let's get some deoxygenated blood in here. It's going to be purple over here. All right. Well, now that we have all this blood, we want to go from the right atrium to the right ventricle. But how does that happen? It's not necessarily a contraction that pushes it through. It's actually due to a concentration gradient, a pressure concentration gradient. So by adding all this blood into this right atrium, we'll notice we don't have any blood over here in this right ventricle. Well, because of all this new pressure, it's going to open up this valve and the blood is going to fall in here. It's going to go down its concentration gradient. And about 80% of that is going to fall through, and then the right atrium is going to contract, and 20%, the rest of the 20% is going to fall through into the right ventricle, and this valve is going to close. And that's going to cause our first heart sound called lub. So let's just take a second and talk about the little valve over here, and that valve is called the tricuspid. Tricuspid, okay? The reason it's called the tricuspid is because it has three little cusps. And you'll notice that it's also attached to these strings over here, and those strings are attached to these little muscles. Well, these muscles are called papillary muscles because they look like little papilla. And these strings are called chordae tendineae. They're called our heartstrings. So why do we have them? Well, look at all this blood we threw into this right ventricle. We said things like to go down their concentration gradient. It's always easier, I like to remember, it's always easier to ride a bike down a hill than it is to ride a bike up a hill. So there's no blood in here. Wouldn't it be easier just to go back? Well, we could, but we won't. And the reason being is that when the ventricle contracts, so do these papillary muscles, and they quite literally pull on your heartstrings, preventing this tricuspid from regurgitating and expelling blood back into the right atrium. So the only other place we can go is over here, and this is called the pulmonary semilunar valve, because we want to exchange our deoxygenated blood for oxygenated blood. I'm going to write it over here, pulmonary semilunar valve. It's called pulmonary because we're going to go to the lungs, and semilunar because it kind of looks like a moon, crescent shaped. Alright, so let's see where this goes. We're going to get rid of all this deoxygenated blood from our right ventricle, and we're going to go to the pulmonary trunk. And it's going to be up here, pulmonary trunk. And it's going to break off into two other vessels because we have two lungs. And you guessed it, those vessels are called the right pulmonary artery and the left pulmonary artery. Well, the blood's going to go to the lungs, and we're going to go through gas exchange and exchange this deoxygenated blood for oxygenated blood, and we're going to come back to the heart. As we said, we always go back to the atrium, so we're going to go back to the left atrium this time. And we're going to go back via 4 veins. And these 4 veins are called the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins. Wait a second. This is a little weird. Didn't I, on the previous page, I had the veins drawn in blue and the arteries drawn in red, and here it's switched. Well, we got to remember that artery just means away from the heart, and in this case the artery happened to have deoxygenated blood, and the veins just came back from the lungs, so the pulmonary veins had oxygenated blood. Alright, so now we have all this oxygenated blood in here, all this oxygenated blood in our left atrium. Well, what do? We want to go down our pressure concentration gradient. So we're going to go from the left atrium to the left ventricle because we don't really have that much blood in there. So we're going to go down that way. That valve is going to open, then the atriums are going to contract, and then 20% is going to fall in with the rest of that 80 that's already in here. And that valve is going to close, and it's going to, again, produce our first heart sound, lub. This valve is going to be called the mitral valve. Mitral valve. Okay? It's called the mitral valve because old anatomists thought it looked like a mitre hat, which I think is just a fancy ceremonial hat for a bishop. Or we can call it the bicuspid. Bicuspid, because it has 2 cusps. Now, remember on the right side of the heart we had 3 cusps, therefore we had 3 papillary muscles. Well, over here we only have 2 cusps, so we only need 2 papillary muscles. We still have the chorda tendineae. They still pull down when the ventricle contracts, preventing the mitral valve from regurgitating. So, the only other place we can go is, you guessed it, the aorta through the aortic semilunar valve. Aortic semilunar valve, because we're going to go to the aorta. Again, it looks like a little moon, so it's called the semilunar valve. So blood is going to be expelled from the left ventricle, and it's going to shoot up through that aortic semilunar valve, and it's going to close, and that's going to produce our second heart sound, dub. I noticed I forgot to mention that when this valve, the pulmonary semilunar valve, closes when the blood expels and comes back down, it's also called lub. Alright, so we're going to go to the aorta, and we're going to send blood to the rest of the body. Okay? Now I have a quick question. Does the blood that was inside the heart, the oxygenated blood that came into the left and atrium, is that the blood that feeds the heart and gives it the nutrients it needs? No. This is just like a chamber. It's holding it. The place where the blood comes into the heart and gives it its nutrients is actually through this aortic semilunar. Right above it, you'll find 2 vessels, and they're called the coronary arteries. And they're going to give the blood to the heart. And they're going to go through their cycle, and they're going to come back into the right atrium through this coronary sinus. Alright, that's pretty much the blood flow of the heart and its anatomy. Let's quickly do a quick run through of what we just learned. Well, we have 4 chambers in the heart, the right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. The atriums receive blood while the ventricles expel blood. The right ventricle expels blood to the pulmonary circulation, while the left ventricle expels blood to the systemic circulation. The valves between the atriums and the ventricles are called cuspids. On the right side we have a tricuspid, on the left we have a bicuspid or mitral valve. And the valves between the vessels are called semilunars. So on the right we're going to go to the lungs, so pulmonary semilunar, and the left we have the aortic semilunar because we're going to go to the aorta. And that's it. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a great day.